I did consider buying a thing of Kool-Aid so I could make a joke about drinking the Kool-Aid, but I couldn't be bothered. So, let's try something different with this video that's, not Titans related. I've been wanting to talk about movies for some time now, and I wanted to talk first about one of my favorite directors of all time, Stanley Kubrick, and his 7 best films. I picked the number 7 because that's about half of his filmography. 10 would have been too many for this list because he's only got 13 movies, so it would just be like his entire filmography minus the first 3 that he made, basically. Top 5 would have been too hard for me to select, so 7 it is. A lot of people really love this movie, and I can understand why. I quite like it too, and the fact that it's at the bottom of my list goes to show how much I appreciate all of his work. But there are a few things that drag it down. Now, the plot of the story is Dr. Bill Harford finds out that his wife once fantasized about having an affair with a sailor whilst they were on holiday. He takes it terribly and wanders on this night. Takes this night of just wandering the streets. He ends up at this cultish, we're just going to call it party to keep it PG rated, where he does not belong. And then for the rest of the film, he's dealing with the consequences of sticking his nose where it should not have been. So the film relies on this sort of dreamlike feeling throughout the whole thing. Kubrick utilizes a special type of lighting, mostly through Christmas lights and sort of fairy lights, to elicit this soft glow throughout the film, which renders it somewhat dreamlike. Also contributing to this sort of not quite real feeling of the film is the very slow pace. It was a bit glacial for my taste, I'm not gonna lie, but it was done for a reason. I can appreciate that. Cruise's and Kidman's performances in this film are also sort of airy, especially when they're speaking with each other. It's like they're speaking in slow motion, and that contributes a lot to just sort of the uncanny valley of the film, I guess. Also has something to do with the fact that Kubrick made them do it like 40 times over, so by the end of that 40th take, they were doing it in ways that they ordinarily would not act. The soundtrack is probably one of the least notable usages of soundtrack in a Kubrick film. I like the opening waltz that he uses at beginning and end. It's deceptively cheerful. Jocelyn Pook's compositions that are used during the party are suitably weird and almost inhuman. And there's that liturgy piano piece that everyone talks about. I don't like it, personally, because it's a bit dissonant for my taste, and I don't like the fact that it comes up a bunch in the second half of the film, but that's just details. And I feel like had Kubrick lived to see this film entirely to completion, it would have been a lot different. But I guess we'll never know. Yeah, that's the other thing. It feels a bit unfinished, because he died 4 days after showing what he called the final cut to the execs. But we all know Kubrick loved to screw about with his films even after he said it was complete. Case in point, The Shining, and many others. So we'll never know what the movie truly would have been had he lived to see it to the end. It's an interesting thought, really. Now already, if I do have any Kubrick fans watching this, I can hear you raging at the screen, telling me what an idiot I am for putting Clockwork Orange so low. I do have a reason for that. It is no doubt an excellent film. But it's not really a film for me. We'll get into that in a minute. Of course, we'll give a quick synopsis of the film. Alex is this young bloke who has a few mates who go around basically beating the crap out of people for the fun of it, whilst charged up on drugs and milk. And one day he accidentally murders somebody. He gets sent up the spout for it, where he is subjected to the Ludovico technique, a technique of erasing evil from people but it leaves him completely defenseless, and as a result, if he even thinks about like throwing a punch or thinks anything dirty towards anyone, he doubles over in pain and starts to feel sick, which means that the instant he's out of jail, he gets the living hell beaten out of him by his old friends, by a bunch of homeless people, and then finally he's driven almost to suicide by a man that he'd previously destroyed the life of when they played Beethoven at him until he jumps out a window, because the side effect of this technique was he could no longer listen to Beethoven, because that was used in the films they showed him during the Ludovico technique. Overall, as I said, it is an excellent film. The cinematography easily elicits the uneasy feeling you're supposed to feel by using extreme wide lenses to sort of distort the view of the film. The score is suitably bizarre because there's something wrong, I feel, at least, about hearing classical music played on electronica instruments. I don't know if that's just me, but that just sounded weird. Although it does have the side effect of rendering Beethoven's fourth movement of its Ninth Symphony as a sort of really bizarre circus thing. I'll play a little bit here. It doesn't sound like Beethoven anymore. It sounds sort of wrong. But I believe that was partially the point. The main theme, of course, is amazing. It's borrowed from Rossini's Funeral March for Mary Queen of Scots, I believe it was. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. But from my research, I believe I'm right. Of course, this film would not be this film without Malcolm McDowell, whose performance is spectacularly insane, which means that he's alternately terrifying and funny. Funny less than terrifying, I will admit, but it was his spontaneous thoughts on set of the film, which ended up with Singing in the Rain being what he was singing when he was kicking the crap out of the writer. Without him, this movie probably would have been a lot worse. It is an interesting question as how this film is classified, though, because I went to the list last time, I watched it thinking of it as a horror film, but some other people think of it as a dark comedy, but honestly, in some ways, I guess it could work for both, because on the one hand, it is truly disturbing. Like, it disturbs me more than Kubrick's actual horror film, The Shining. But there are also a lot of comical moments, like the fight scene with Billy Boys Droogs, where they're throwing each other all around the place, set to upbeat classical music. It is funny in a bizarre little way, because I think Kubrick's rather sarcastic look at violence throughout this film really comes to a head there. And also, all of the authority figures throughout the film are cartoonishly psychotic. Like the corrections officer that Alex goes through before he gets arrested, or the prison guard who's constantly screaming in Alex's face, who I call Prison Hitler. A, because I can't remember his name, and B, he looks like Hitler, which I don't think was an accident. Yeah, this movie, it's a very, very bizarre film, but it's also very well made. But it's also really disturbing, so if that's my thoughts on that. This film follows the attempts of Americans to stop the nuking of the Soviet Union after an American general goes postal and orders a nuclear attack on the Soviet Union. Of course, the catch being that it is a particular plan for a nuclear attack that even the president cannot call back unless he has a specific code. So through the film, they're trying to find the code. Then when they find the code, one of the planes is still AWOL, so they have to find a way of stopping it. But by the end, it's all too late. They drop a nuke on Russia, and that's the end of that. From what I just described, it sounds like a pretty apocalyptic movie, but it is actually a comedy. And the way that it's made a comedy is, of course, through Kubrick's rather sarcastic sense of humor. He uses his humor to paint the American government as basically incompetent through the usage of the president, who's kind of weak. He's supposed to be portrayed as a bit weak. That was Peter Saul's general idea. Through the childish General Turgensen, through the batshit insane General Ripper, So generally, everyone's painted as pretty incompetent. The man flying the nuclear attack that is painted as this stupid cowboy, and yeah, it's all played for laughs. This was one film where Kubrick let his actors improvise a lot, so we've got a lot of Peter Sellers doing his thing because, you know, he was a comedian. Rumors say that the entire phone call between the Russian premier and the president was completely improvised by Sellers on the spot. So, of course, given that this film is filmed at the height of the Cold War, it's obviously commentary on that and how ridiculous that got. And, of course, this movie would not be as funny as it is without Peter Sellers playing 3 different roles. He was also going to play the cowboy pilot of the nuclear plane, but he hurt himself and couldn't. One other thing that really elevates this film is the production design. Shouldn't say always love, because I've only recently come across Ken Adams stuff and watching the old James Bond films, but his production design is always on point, and here it is just the same. The War Room is an exceptional piece of production design. I really don't think we'll ever get anybody like Ken Adam ever again. And of course, you can't discuss this movie without bringing up the hilariously bleak ending, which is rendered a punchline to the entire film by the usage of Vera Lynn. So all in all, if you're looking for a laugh, definitely check this one out. Barry Lyndon, it's not one that's immediately a masterpiece. This one, on the first viewing, you might think it a bit dull, but upon multiple viewings, it slowly unfolds itself for the movie it is. The plot of this film is about a man called Redmond Barry, who, after running away from home because he thinks he's accidentally killed somebody, he joins the army and then starts using that to slowly climb the social ranks until he becomes the husband of a very powerful lady, and he takes on the name Barry Lyndon. From there, he proceeds to be a completely unlikable bastard, and yeah, that's basically the plot of the film. So for Kubrick's standards, it's a relatively simple story, but it's effective nonetheless. Mostly because of his overt style over substance directing here. And do not think that style over substance here is being used in a negative way, because it isn't, because the style that he does employ is gorgeous. The cinematography of this film is just impeccable, because as a way of placing the characters in the period that he set the film, he's based a lot of this cinematography off paintings from the 17th century. The result, of course, being that this film is an absolute treat to watch, with every frame being a painting. Like, I'm not really even joking here. Every shot is really, really gorgeous to look at. Quite a lot of the nighttime scenes were filmed entirely by candlelight, and the fact that they were able to pull it off and still make it look fantastic is just a testament to how well Kubrick knows his craft. The opening shot, of course, masterpiece of an opening shot, probably one of my favorite opening shots in a film ever. Nerd! Also used a lot in this film is Kubrick's slow zoom out, which slowly reveals more of the canvas to the viewer. Yeah, no, just for the cinematography alone, this movie is definitely worth a watch. Like, if it weren't filmed so great, it probably wouldn't have made this list, but because of the way it is composed visually and the music they use as well, I'm a big fan of the piano trio that's used on and off throughout the movie, which is probably playing under this bit right now. Yeah, definitely. If you got 3 hours to have something on and just watch it for the craft, this movie is perfect for that. And also, if you like period dramas and you have 3 hours to spare, this movie is perfect for you. So give this one a go, everybody. I feel this one is pretty underrated in Kubrick's work because it comes before so many of his more successful films. But this one, make no mistake, this one is amazing. And it is probably Kubrick's most emotionally resonant film, in my opinion. So, of course, the plot of this film is General Muro orders Colonel Dax to send his men on a suicide mission. When it fails, inevitably, General Muro accuses Colonel Dax's battalions of cowardice, and has one man from each battalion sent up, which is a total of 3 men, sent to court-martial for cowardice, at which point they are found guilty and sent to death by firing squad. You know, nice, happy, family-friendly movie. I wasn't sure what to expect when I first went into this, but then I watched it and found it a spectacular film. We'll start with the performance of Kirk Douglas, because without the performance of Kirk Douglas, a lot of the emotion within this film wouldn't be as potent, I don't think. Throughout the film, Kirk Douglas is playing Colonel Dax, and he's playing him as a man who's constantly holding back the urge to snap at his superiors and tell them where to stick themselves. And he goes through hell and back trying to defend his men, only to see them shot to death by firing squad. And then at the end, when General Muro is put under arrest by another general for having cannons fire on their own men, he then turns around and says, "Oh, well, Colonel Dax, do you want General Muro's job? I know you only tried to get rid of him because you wanted the promotion." And at that point, he just loses his mind, and all the anger that he's been building up for the entire film unleashes.
I apologize, sir, for not telling you sooner that you're a degenerate, sadistic old man. And you can go to hell before I apologize to you now or ever again.
The generals in this film, I could make a supercut of every horrible thing they say, but I'm just going to give you a sample here.
The men died wonderfully. There's always that chance that one of them will do something that will leave everyone with a bad taste. This time you couldn't ask for better.
They make no bones about the fact that you are supposed to hate them with a passion. They're just horrible, horrible people. And it just makes me angry every time watching this movie, because I know one of them gets away with it, and the comeuppance the other one gets is almost not enough. Like, Muro, he gets his comeuppance, but it's still frustrating that he takes himself away still believing he's completely right. And it's painful to watch. Well, the trial scene is just hard to watch, because even if you go into this movie blind, you get the feeling that these men are doomed no matter what. You know that the court's going to find them guilty and have them shot. So it's just a huge exercise in complete pointlessness, and it's painful to watch. The scene where they're shot is even harder to watch, because one of them's half dead after a serious head injury, one of them is crying for his life, and one of them knows for a fact that he was selected for this trial because he knew something that his commanding officer didn't want to know. Of course, his commanding officer was placed by Colonel Dax as chief of the firing squad as a sort of, I know why you chose this man to die, so you're going to watch him die up close and personal, which shows that even Colonel Dax is in some way dehumanized by the whole war process, but he's still got the most personality of the lot. And of course, the final scene of this film is heartbreaking. Seriously, I do not throw that term lightly, but watching the final scene of this film really, really depresses me every time. And I remember watching this one with my family, and I think I probably misled them by just saying, yeah, it's a 50s war film, so I'll probably think you would be, you know, a bit sad in places, but it was made in the 50s, how bad can it get? And I think I actually depressed them. So this movie is potent. It is potent. This is the movie that got me into horror films. Of course, the plot of this film is well known. Even if you don't know the film, you've probably read the Stephen King novel, and if you haven't done either, what are you doing? Okay, the plot, of course, is Jack Torrance takes his family up to live at the Overlook Hotel because he is now the caretaker over the winter, but the hotel is kind of alive, and it is a malevolent force which seems to be begging for violence and death, and it slowly turns Jack against his family to the point that he's ready to murder them. And yeah, that's the plot. This movie is terrifying. As I said, it's the movie that got me into horror films, because before I watched this movie, I thought all horror films were just blood, splatter, violence, just for the sake of it. This one taught me that sometimes people actually want to scare you and not just gross you out. The atmospheric dread of the whole film works so well with Kubrick's slow burn style, because it's just for 2 hours the dread slowly builds until it finally breaks into psychosis in the final half hour. And of course the soundtrack helps with that slow atmospheric dread. Wendy Carlos gave a score for it, but then Kubrick elected to ignore the majority of it. But what is used from Carlos is still incredible, because we've got that opening theme, which is recognizable but isn't my favorite. We've got the cue from Route 37, which is my favorite cue from this whole film by a long way. I'll bring up the track here. I can't bring up the visuals, of course, because this is a PG rated channel. The atmospheric dread of this film is incredible. The cinematography throughout adds to the uneasy feeling by using the wide lenses to sort of distort. He used the wide lenses also to film the profiles of the characters and like their faces, so their faces are sort of distorted as well, because wide lenses distort your face if you're filming them close up. The imagery throughout, like the blood elevator, the twins, the room 237 scene, that bit terrifies me the most. Just on a side note, all of the imagery is haunting and occasionally just so bizarre you really don't know what you're looking at, and that makes it all the more terrifying. The bad guy being an example. But of course this film would not be as scary if it weren't for the performances of our three main characters. Jack Nicholson is perfectly unhinged. You know from the word go that he's going to go insane, mostly because he's just Jack Nicholson. But by the end of the film, he's acting in even more erratic behaviors, even by Jack Nicholson standards. Shelley Duvall, we can have an whole ethical argument as to what Stanley did to her on set to get that performance out of her, but let's just say he got her to act terrified, mostly because on some level she was actually terrified. So yeah, no, her performance is, a lot of people hate on her for it because she's reduced to a blubbering and terror, but that's exactly what Kubrick wanted her to do. So win. Danny Lloyd, the kid playing Danny, he's actually probably in places more terrifying than Jack Nicholson, because for starts, he invented this thing that he does when Tony talks. That was his idea entirely, and for a kid actor, he was exceptional. Like, one of my favorite bits where you can see just how good Danny Lloyd was when Tony is talking to him after he sees the Grady twins. His face becomes completely blank as Tony talks, and then Tony stops talking, and Danny switches instantly to fear. And yeah, no, he was really, really good. Surprisingly good. And even when Danny shuts down and Tony's the only one talking throughout the whole thing, just the blank look on Danny's face is... that kid was terrifying. So I think he's the understated star of the film, honestly. If you like horror and you haven't seen this movie, what are you doing? Go see it now. And that leaves us at number one. And we all know what this number one is. It's the single greatest Kubrick film. It's Spartacus. I'm kidding. Spartacus can suck a dick. No shit! Anyone going into this probably knew I was going to say that. Even if you don't know me personally, everyone knows that I was going to say 2001: Space Odyssey, because that's what normies say is the best Stanley Kubrick movie. What can I say? This ticks all of my boxes for what makes a good movie. Is it science fiction? Check. Is it by one of my favorite directors? Check. Is it a bit of a slow burner? Check. I could go on. Point is, it ticks a lot of my boxes. And it is also just a masterpiece. From the opening moments, it's far different from most of science fiction today and back then as well. It is probably the greatest science fiction film of the 20th century. I would say the greatest science fiction film of all time. We do have some contenders for that though, and I'll discuss those at some point as well. The visuals are incredible, the special effects so good that if you told me it came out in the 80s or even today, I would believe you for a moment. The effects are more realistic in places than some of what we are actually seeing today. This was due to Kubrick being, Kubrick. And it's not just the special effects, the shot composition is masterful. The soundtrack is used well, from the Blue Danube Waltz being used in space to Liturgy's Kyrie being used to signify the arrival of the monolith and the alien nature of what it is. Just to the atmospheres, also by Liturgy, being used during the space trip at the end. All of it creating this sort of, all of Liturgy's work creating the alien, and then the waltz that is used creating this sort of human side of it, and the duality between that shown throughout the film. There are a number of iconic moments in this film. I really do not know how to put into words why I love this film so much. It's just all of those great moments. The way it's all strung together, the story it tells, even if it's not really a story, it's more of an overarching theme. The idea of evolution, how humanity evolves with technology, or how technology shapes our evolution. The idea of what makes us human, as best exemplified by Hal. And whether he feels emotions. The best kind of science fiction isn't just flashy technology for the sake of it. It's science fiction that tells us something about ourselves, and this movie does that sensationally. I could go on. In fact, I intend to make a separate video for each of these films that I've just discussed. But if you have not seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, you need to go see that now. Anyway, that's my top 7 Stanley Kubrick films. As I said, I intend to go in depth about his movies at some point, probably when I'm a better YouTuber, because the depth I want to go into actually requires that I have some form of talent. In the meantime, I will give you that obligatory speech about that like and that subscribe button. I'll be releasing more stuff over this coming week, and in the meantime, I will see you later.